Devon Achane is RB7, while Joe Mixon is the RB23 in current average draft position for 2024 fantasy drafts. We debate why these prices are way off, plus discuss other running back rankings we disagree with on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk. When I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, specifically looking at the draft and free agency. Of course, it's betting and fantasy at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, today's episode, we are going to go through the consensus running back rankings for the 2024 redraft leagues, right? So we're going to say, guys, that we just do not agree on at all with their current ranking. Either they'd be too high or they're going too low. We'll discuss three guys each. We did this with wide receivers yesterday. So after this episode, if you didn't listen to that one yet, go listen to that. Vinny, let's start with your most egregious difference that you saw when you were looking at the 2024 consensus running back rankings.
Yeah, I know this guy is not all that exciting, and he's getting a little bit older, and he's changing teams, and he wasn't all that inspiring on his previous team, but he got the job done. And you looked up where he produced. That's Joe Mixon. He's right now at RB23. And why I have a problem with this ranking is there's nobody else as of this recording. The draft might change things, but he's the main guy, replacing Devin Singletary. Dameon Pierce was phased out a little bit of that Bobby Slowick offense. He didn't fit it all that well. Mixon, they wouldn't go out and get him, right? They actually were active and pursued him and acquired him here if they didn't think he was a good fit in their offense and what he could do to complement CJ Stroud and the passing game. Now, you say this passing game just got Stephon Diggs. They've got Nico Collins. They've got Tank Dell. They've got Dalton Schultz. You think, okay, this could be a crazy 65-35 passing team, and you would not be surprised. But guess what other team was very pass happy with all its receivers and a elite young quarterback? It was the Bengals with Joe Burrow throwing to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Someone's going to finish those drives. The Texans are going to score a lot of points. And I think that's what you have to look at. Some teams just have more targets, more opportunities for yards, more opportunities to score. If you're a good offense, you're going to obviously get that. If you're moving the ball close to 400 yards consistently and you're looking at scoring 24 to 27 points, that's going to be a lot of opportunity for your running back, especially if he's in a lead role. And that's the thing. You got the volume last year. He didn't really slow down that much in terms of the high leverage touches. He was a little bit limited with the yards per carry and all that, but the offense is going to open things up. The running lanes are going to look good for him. He's going to finish a lot of drives. He should probably get double-digit touchdowns here just based on this offense alone, that they need somebody near the goal line. So when you look at that, Joe Mixon is in a great environment. I think there were a lot of places where he would not have been this promising in fantasy, including staying in Cincinnati, but now he goes to Houston, which I think is the perfect fit, especially with Singletary gone.
Yeah, he's consistently a top 10 running back in fantasy. And like you said, Joe Mixon's not exciting, but he will be a top 10 running back again on this really on an offense that we expect to be a high scoring offense. He's going to have a lot of scoring opportunities. I can't imagine any other running back is going to be taking those opportunities away from him. It's not like they use CJ Stroud near the goal line all the time where it's like he's playing with the Jalen Hurts or something like that. And yeah, maybe he gets fewer targets than he did with the Bengals over the last couple of years. That should happen, right? Because of the stacked offense, but that's okay. He can lose a couple of those. He's still going to be an RB12-ish. I think at the worst, RB23, I agree. It's just, that's a great value for him and too low. Now, my guy's the opposite. I think he's going way too high. That's Devon Anan, running back 8. And it's not even just high. I think it's insanely high. He was running back 7 just yesterday. So I looked today again. He's dropped down to running back 8 just in a day. So maybe people are starting to get lower on him as well. I understand he started so incredibly hot. And when he was on the field, he was electric, right? Those first 4 games he played, were absolutely amazing. After that, you saw it come back down to reality. 12 points, 9 points, 4 points. Had another big game in week 17, and then week 8, 13 points, which is fine for the volume he's getting. He's not getting a lot of work. So if he's going to score 13, 12 points with the work he's getting, that's still really good for him, but not RB8. Like, that's way too high of a draft cost. And he didn't get to play a lot of games last year because he was 5'9", 188 pounds, and got injured. Got injured before the season and preseason. He hurt his shoulder, and then he hurt his knee and went on to IR last year. So he missed a significant amount of time on IR with a knee injury. And because he's small, you just probably have to assume he's going to deal with these injuries, and he can't take on a super large workload. And then plus Raheem Mostert's still there, and they just extended him to this new contract. Mostert got pretty much all the carries inside the 10 and inside the 5 last year. Right. He was a great scorer. I don't see why that changes unless Mostert gets hurt, maybe. But I don't see the volume available to Achane to say he's worth an RB8 price. I cannot think of a single reason to take him over guys like Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, even, or like other top wide receivers that you could get there, like a Chris Olave or something. Like, that price is a couple rounds too high for me. I get his upside and how exciting he is, but the risk is way too steep for that price.
Yeah, be careful with these type of guys. Other than Breece Hall, who's actually the lead volume back, these speedy kind of change of pace guys, and we saw all of them kind of have some flashes to different degrees. Devon Anan was at the top of this, right? He was the number 1 poster boy for this. Then Tyjae Spears was a sleeper, but what did the Titans do? They realized he was a smaller back. They went out and got Tony Pollard, right, to help replace Derrick Henry. And then Keaton Mitchell is somewhat in this vein of, okay, very fast running back, but can you trust him to hold up and take that beating? So everyone wants one of these backs, but they also have to be realistic. They can't be on the field and take that pounding as a feature back. And when you're ranked RB7 or RB8, that says you're a feature back. That says you're going to get 20 to 25 touches on a really good day and 15 to 20 on a bad day. And I don't see that. I think they know he's a calculated change of pace back. He's more effective when he comes in there and he can use his speed and play off Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle when maybe other people are tired, right? The defense is worn down. You get him out there. And I know you just can't expect explosive plays, however, from him all the time. I mean, it's really hard to base someone's value on explosive plays. Like, there's not great. I mean, even Tyreek Hill needs a little bit more than explosive plays to really round his fantasy value into form here. So, look, I'm totally with you. I need the Dolphins to trust him more like a feature back. I just can't see it. And I think you keep pointing to the right thing, that he's not going to hold up. He had durability issues last year and coming in and going back to Texas A&M. So you got to be very careful with this guy's workload. And if you think you can get an RB8, even in full PPR sometimes with a guy that's seeing the ball 12 to 15 times, it's just a stretch. I mean, he's going to have to be incredibly, ridiculously efficient, and I don't see that here. So that's a really good call by you. And again, he's going to be hyped. Let someone else buy into that hype and overpay for this guy.
Yeah, him as my running back 1 would scare me greatly, right? Like, you can't have a 5'9", 188-pound guy who's getting around 10 to 12 touches a game as your RB1. And then if he's your RB2, that means you went running back in the first round, took him in the second, and now you're waiting on all the other positions, especially wide receivers. So I just don't like that route for anybody. Now, I will say I go with a boring guy with my next pick. These boring vets, it seems like we're going to get good value from them in the draft this year.
Yeah, and I have a guy that is still boring, but I'm going to put him on the other side of the coin here. So we'll get into those 2 backs, and again, 2 more in our final segment as well. All right, we know the NCAA tournament's just wrapped up here, but we know what's going on here. The playoffs are just about to happen. with the tip-off in the NBA, the puck drop in the NHL, the games are going to have higher stakes. Their baseball is headed toward the nitty-gritty here of the first half into April and May. Well, there's only one place to get your action bet on every game. That's FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's right, $150 win or lose there. So it's a great deal to take advantage of. Now, bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Michelle, let's reveal your guy here that you say is too low. And I agree with you. He is ranked as the last of the RB2s, and the top 24 here is not Jay Harris of your Steelers. So we're going back to
Yeah.
your Steelers, even though I took the Steelers take yesterday on George Pickens.
Najee Harris sitting at RB 24, 89th overall. That's just too low for him. I understand last year, gross year, RB 32 in fantasy points per game on the season. And it's not like the year prior, he was RB 20 in points per game in 2022, RB 8 in 2021. So we haven't seen a good season from him since his rookie year in terms of fantasy. But I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad as it was last year, RB 32. I mean, the last 2 years, he's been playing with Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, and he's had Matt Canada as his offensive coordinator. Now you upgrade OC with Arthur Smith. Hopefully it's an upgrade, but he loves to run, so that's good for Najee Harris. And then it's an upgrade at quarterback no matter what. Russell Wilson can play any way. He can play exactly how he's been with the Broncos. It's still a massive upgrade to what we've had. I say what the Steelers have had over the last 2 years. And you saw that immediately he gets Mason Rudolph the last 3 games of the season and not Kenny Pickett. And he's no longer under Matt Canada. And immediately he starts to produce, right? He averages over 104 rushing yards per game over the last 3 games, averaged 20.8 fantasy points per game, scored 4 times because they're actually putting up points. Like that was wild. So I just think overall with the quarterback change and the OC change, those are just immediate upgrades right there. We know he's going to get the volume because he does every single year. And then also he should get a lot more targets this year. Russell Wilson passed to the running back more than any other quarterback last year. The Broncos running backs led all teams in NFL in targets last year at 153. And then talking about Arthur Smith coming from the Falcons running backs were 5th in the NFL for running back targets last year. Now you have Deontay Johnson gone. That's a ton of targets available. And there's really no receivers besides George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth, if you even want to count him. We'll see who else they add in the draft. But still, a lot of targets should go Najee's and Jaylen Warren's way. Running back 24 is too low. It's not egregious, I don't think, but I do think he should be in the teens. I would much rather him over Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift. David Montgomery would be close, but I still think he's going to get way more workload. I'd rather him over Aaron Jones. And they're all going a bit above Najee Harris. So I think this RB24 spot is just too low for Najee.
Yeah, and some of the frustration we had last year with the Falcons and our feeling that Bijan Robinson was not getting the ball enough and Tyler Algier was getting involved, I think that's actually going to help Najee Harris because he's built a little bit more like Algier, is a little bit more of a power back, but he's also nifty where he can catch passes. And I would say Jaylen Warren's good in the open field, but in terms of the power running and the shorter checkdowns and things that you're looking at on early downs, that's going to be Najee Harris's domain here in 2024. So, yeah, I mean, I think the other thing you think about is the offensive line is going to be a little bit better, hopefully, and just maybe invest in it a little bit more in the draft. That's going to help. You have a running quarterback either way and a guy with a strong arm with Wilson or Justin Fields. That's going to help either way, right? In terms of getting that running back a little bit more running lanes and just being able to stretch the field. As you mentioned, Mason Rudolph came in, and once you have a legitimate offense, the running back becomes a lot more relevant because you're passing downfield, you're putting up points, someone's got to score, and Najee Harris is good at doing that. He's a big back that you can finish with well, and Wilson is a scrambler, but he's not like a guy that's going to pilfer the touchdowns. It's still going to be the running back. We've seen it with Kenneth Walker. We've seen it going back in the day with Marshawn Lynch. We've seen it with different guys over the years, and even last year, right? They had different Broncos running backs. It wasn't the guy we wanted all the time, but that opened up things in the red zone for these running backs. So overall, Najee Harris, I completely agree with you. I think it's going to be a much better year for him. And don't worry too much about Jalen Warren. We had so much hype about Jalen Warren last year. This is more of a Harris type offense, and I think you tilt toward him. And that's why he can't finish as the last RB2 on the board. Now, my guy I'm looking at is way too high. He's RB11. It's Rachaad White. And interesting with the Bucks offseason, they really haven't looked at competition for White, but I think that could be coming in the draft here going forward. And slightly different offense, we know, without Dave Canales. So that's something to consider. But Rachaad White was really receiving dependent last year to put up his numbers. He wasn't a very efficient runner. He didn't necessarily give you the touchdowns he wanted. So this is hard to duplicate for any of these type of backs, that they're a little bit dependent in the passing game and those numbers that you just cheaply accumulate in half point and full point PPR. And I think that volume is going to go down. I think you look at a different style of offense that's here, that maybe saying, okay, we might incorporate another back as much as we want here. And that, so I just look at this and like Rachaad White, again, this spike is just too hard to duplicate when you're that inefficient. We talked about how Brandon Ayuk was so efficient, right? And that's not going to duplicate. Well, sometimes if you're not doing things in the running game, that kind of carries over a little bit more, and your receiving work is not going to have the same type of juice. And I see that with Rachaad White. So again, we've talked about him. He's a very frustrating player because, again, you look at the numbers in the end, they're there, but you know it's a bit of a grind to get there. So I'm just not going with him as an RB1. I think there's too many guys, including the Joe Mixon we talked about. Even I would look at Devon Anan having a little bit more upside there at that RB11 than going for Rachaad White, just playing and hoping that he gets the same receiving volume, because I think that could be a real disappointment to the managers who draft him.
Yeah, RB11 is a little too high, but I will say I'm shocked we're in April and they haven't added anyone to
Yeah,
this backfield.
they will.
I thought they're
Okay.
immediately going to go out and add someone in free agency to try to bolster up this running game that was the worst in the NFL last year. Now, typically it's not the running back's fault. Typically it's the offensive line. So maybe they're just focusing more on fixing it with the offensive line. But still, I thought they were going to upgrade with White, and they haven't yet. Now, maybe they spend, a day two pick on a running back. We'll see. And then that could change everything. But I do think at this moment, it looks like White's going to see a good amount of volume, good amount of targets still, but the efficiency is not there. We know he was inconsistent with his points from week to week. Like, there are just way more exciting people that you can take around him, even if it's at a different position, that I think will help you win leagues much more. But I probably if we make it through this draft and they only end up taking, a running back in the 4th, 5th round, it's going to be hard not to rank him as a top 15 guy, but having him at top 12 is a little rich for me. We're going to get into 2 more guys, one guy each that we disagree on in the consensus rankings. I have a guy that I think is way too high, and you have one that's too low. So we will get to that in our final segment. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for your everyday to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so my first guy here, it's Isiah Pacheco. So he right now is being ranked RB13. And I understand it, but I still think it's too high because last year he's RB14 in fantasy points per game. So he's moved up a little bit in the rankings by 1. And I just don't think, I think it's fair to just say he finishes probably around RB14, RB15 next year. Now, that does not mean that's where I'm going to rank him and where I want to draft him, right? If I'm drafting a guy at RB13, I want him to have way more upside than just being the RB 13, 14, 15. Of course, if you dropped a guy at RB 13 and he ends there, fine, it's a fine pick, but you definitely want more upside. And I just don't see it with Pacheco. He had only 49 targets all season long last year, despite the Chiefs desperately needing guys to pass to. It's not like they really turned to him at any moment of the season. Now they added Hollywood Brown. Now Rashee Rice has really established himself in this offense heading into his 2nd season. Hopefully Travis Kelce is healthy all year long, unlike last year. And then I think we can all agree they're likely to add a wide receiver some point early in this draft. Maybe not round 1, but round 2 or round 3. He had no games with more than 20 carries last year, only 4 games with more than 16 carries. And he did have some nice games towards the end, but weeks 1 through 11 were very and that's just what I assume it's going to stay around with some big games in between. But just the way they utilize him has been inconsistent. Now, they brought in J.K. Dobbins for a visit. He clearly Dobbins isn't looking great or something because they didn't sign him. They just moved on to re-sign Clyde Edwards-Helaire right away, which I don't think Edwards-Helaire hurts them. But it is interesting they're looking to bring in another running back. So maybe they draft a guy that could be worrisome as well. But I just don't see the big upside there with him. Will he finish around RB13? If he stays healthy all year, sure. But I want someone more exciting. I want someone that catches more passes, right? Like Joe Mixon, he should have more opportunities with volume plus some pass catching. Alvin Kamara, way more targets. Najee Harris, like I said, way more targets. Ramondre Stevenson, way more targets. Like if I'm going to take a guy that I expect to get more volume than Isiah Pacheco on the ground and then also more targets, I'm going to want that guy. If you want someone boring later that's a consistent RB2, just take James Conner at running back 20. He's going multiple rounds later than Pacheco.
Yeah, Isiah Pacheco is a very difficult case because he looks outstanding when they give him the ball enough times and he can finish drives, but that's also not the nature of the Chiefs' offense. They want to be looking at passing first all the time, and I think you'll also see the downfield passing game be restored a little bit with Patrick Mahomes. So that's what they want to do first, open things up, and then go to Isiah Pacheco to close out games, grind away at the yards, get a touchdown to put the game over the top. And that's the way they look at Isiah Pacheco. And they're also very calculated, as we saw with not only Pacheco, but Travis Kelce. What are they doing? They know that they're playing probably 2 to 3 more games every year at this point with Patrick Mahomes. So they're playing for the long haul. All of a sudden, you saw Travis Kelce rejuvenated. In the playoffs, he was going off. Isiah Pacheco, bigger factor there when they needed him. So they're careful with these guys, again, knowing that in the end, they're probably going to be well positioned to make a playoff run. So they're going to be careful with his workload. Why not? I mean, he's been a huge factor in helping them finish off these titles back to back. So, yeah, they're going to be careful with Pacheco. I think the biggest thing is the pass catching. We're not sure. I think they could get a dedicated, more, I guess, true receiving back in the draft. I mean, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was billed as that coming out of LSU. He's not even been close to that role. Jerick McKinnon is gone. So maybe getting a player like that into the mix, that would really cut into Pacheco's workload. So there's weeks I think he can't go off and get those. If they're playing from ahead, he gets the volume, gets the touchdown, you're looking good. But there are going to be weeks where it's also pretty empty, where they're in a shootout with another AFC power and you see the ball going up in the air a lot. So I do like your call. Again, Pacheco's a hard guy to rank because he could end up this way, but you might see it being very inconsistent where you have more inefficient games than not. Now, my guy that I have for the last segment here is Ramondre Stevenson. I'm going to say he's too low. You mentioned I'd rather have him, or you'd rather have him than Pacheco. I think so. At RB19, you look at it, Antonio Gibson is who the Patriots added here. I know they're looking for a quarterback. What are they going to do? Jacoby Brissett is their bridge guy. Are they going to end up with Drake May or looking at Jaden Daniels, or do they trade out of it and get Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr.? However I look at it, the strength of this team is still the offensive line, running the ball. If Daniels is in there, running quarterback is going to help your running back with his production. Ezekiel Elliott, they're not all that enthused about having him back there, obviously, with Gibson in the mix. And Gibson is not a big threat because Stevenson can do a lot of the things that Gibson does, but better. I think they just need a little bit of versatility in their backup in their new offense. So something to keep in mind. And that is pretty key here, the new offense. Alex Van Pelt, he has some experience from Cleveland. We know what they like to do, run the ball with a healthy Nick Chubb when he was there. I think they brought in Gibson as maybe being like a light version of Kareem Hunt and try to recreate that from a few years ago. So I think Stevenson is a very talented back. He's very capable of touching the ball 20 plus times a game and being effective here. So I think this guy could be really undersold. I mean, last year it was a bit of a grind, but then you saw him and it started coming. The numbers were there and you could really rely upon him week after week. So Stevenson, I think, is pretty low. And again, I think part of these rankings, when we look overall, tied to the quarterback uncertainty, but that almost tells you where they're going to go a little bit with their offense, a little bit more run heavy. So I'm in on Stevenson. I'm probably taking him Stevenson as a better value and fading Pacheco.
Yeah, I thought about doing Stevenson here as too low. And then, I started thinking about it. And the more I think about it, the more I'm like, okay, I understand this ranking because we don't know what this offense is going to look
Yeah.
like. We don't know the scoring opportunities that are going to be there because, I mean, this offense right now on paper looks absolutely atrocious. They didn't get to add any wide receivers because it seemed like nobody wanted to go there, and they didn't win the Calvin Ridley, in free agency. They weren't able to get that contract high enough for him. So they go into this draft needing a quarterback. So they can't even take one of these top 3 wide receivers unless they don't take a quarterback. And then what if it's Jaden Daniels? We talked about this with Austin Eckler a couple shows ago. If it's Jaden Daniels, he doesn't pass the running back too much. That could be a worry. But at the same time, this team is going to have to run a lot and trust their offense, whether it's Jacoby Brissett or a rookie quarterback. Like, they're going to have to trust their run game and their defense. And then plus, there's no one else to pass to. So Jaden Daniels might not like passing and checking down to a running back, but who else is he going to pass to? He might just have to use Stevenson out of necessity. So if that's who the quarterback is, he won't be much lower than this. Now, if it's Drake May, I would prefer Stevenson quite a bit higher, probably RB12. Like, he should be going higher than RB19 if that's the case. But we have some learning to do from the draft, and then I'll see how I feel about this Ramondre Stevenson ranking. That's it for today's show. Thank you to all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every day, Vinny and I will be back tomorrow talking consensus quarterback rankings and what we disagree with. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.